cell signal died about 20 minutes past Wawa, which is exactly the stretch of Highway 17 where I always lose it. And I remember thinking that was fine. That was normal, because I'd be home in 3 hours and I could call my daughter from the driveway like I always did. I'd been on the boats for 9 weeks. Iron ore freighter out of Thunder Bay hauling down through the locks to Hamilton and back, and the season had run long because of a mechanical holdup at the Sioux that nobody wanted to talk about on the record. 9 weeks is a long time to be a voice on a marine radio patch and a name on a deposit slip. My granddaughter was 12. I'd raised her since she was 6, since the accident took my son and his wife on the 144 outside Sudbury one February morning when the plows hadn't gotten ahead of the freezing rain. I had a photo of her taped above the chart table in my bunk, gap-toothed, holding a perch off the dock at camp, and I'd looked at it so many times over 9 weeks that I'd stopped seeing it. I wasn't supposed to be home until the 18th. The contract got cut short when the company pulled our vessel for inspection, and the dispatcher called me down to the galley to tell me I was getting paid out early and could catch a ride to Sault Ste. Marie with the relief crew. I should have been happy. Mostly, I was tired in a way that sleep doesn't touch, the kind that settles into your spine after a decade of night watches. But I was going home, and I kept thinking about how my granddaughter's face would do that thing where she tried not to smile and then smiled anyway. I called my sister from a gas station outside the Sioux. She'd been staying at my place to look after Hannah while I was out. That was the arrangement, the same as always. She picked up on the 5th ring, and there was something in her hello that I clocked right away. The way you clock a change in engine noise before you can name what's wrong. Frank, you're early. Boat got pulled. I'm in the Sioux. I'll be home tonight. How's Hannah? There was a pause. I've thought about that pause a lot since. It wasn't long, but it had a shape to it. She's at the program, the one we talked about. I didn't know what she meant. I told her so. The wilderness one, for kids dealing with grief. You signed the consent, Frank, before you left. We went through it at the kitchen table, the brochure with the lake on it. And here's the thing I'm not proud of. I half remembered it. I remembered my sister sitting across from me with a glossy folder, talking fast and warm the way she does, and me being 4 hours off the boat with another departure looming, signing my name on a line because she told me it was good for Hannah. That the girl had been withdrawn, that a professional had recommended structure and time in nature and other kids who understood loss. I remembered thinking it sounded expensive. I remembered thinking my sister knew better than me about girls that age. Because what did I know? A 61-year-old man who'd spent his life on the water. I'd signed it and I'd left, and I hadn't asked a single real question. I want to talk to her, I said. You can't, not during the immersion phase, no outside contact, it's part of the method. They explained all that. What program? Where is it? My sister's voice tightened. Frank, don't make this into something. She's doing well. They send updates. What's the address? She didn't want to give it to me. I could hear her deciding, and then I could hear her give up, reading it off, something in a flat voice, like it was a number that had nothing to do with her. Somewhere up past Chaplow, off a logging road north of the highway. A place called Northwind Character Camp. No street number. Look for the gate at the Second Creek Crossing. I bought a large coffee I didn't drink, and I drove. It's a hard country up there once you leave the towns behind. The highway narrows and the bush closes in on both sides. Black spruce and tamarack and granite that the road was blasted straight through 50 years ago, and there are stretches where you don't see another set of headlights for 40 minutes. I drove through the dark with the radio off because I couldn't stand anything in my ears but my own thinking. I kept doing math. Hannah had been there since the day after I shipped out. That was 7 weeks. 7 weeks. I'd thought she was home in her own bed, with my sister making her lunches, and the whole time she'd been somewhere I couldn't picture, with people I'd never met, because they'd put my name on a piece of paper to make a hard conversation end faster. I found the Second Creek Crossing as the sky was just starting to go gray behind the trees. A chain gate, a hand-painted sign so weathered I had to get out and put my headlights on it to read it. The logging road past the gate was washboard and frost-heaved, and my truck bottomed out twice before the building showed up out of the murk. A main lodge, log-built wood smoke coming off a stovepipe, 2 outbuildings, a diesel generator running somewhere, that steady industrial drone you hear at remote camps. A few windows lit yellow. It didn't look like anywhere a kid went to heal. It looked like a place built by people who'd chosen it because nobody would come up that road by accident. I parked and shut the engine off and sat in the sudden quiet, and that's when I heard it. A sound coming from past the outbuildings, down toward the water. Rhythmic, a dull repeated thud, then a pause, then again. It took me a second to place it because it was the last sound I expected at that hour. Splitting wood. Somebody working a maul to rounds over and over in the cold dark before dawn. I followed it. There was a path worn into the frost-killed grass leading around the back, and below the second building, the ground sloped down toward a frozen-edged lake, and there was a cleared area the size of a hockey rink where the bush had been knocked back, full of stumps and brush piles and a long stacked cord of split wood running along a sagging fence. And there were children working it. I counted them as my eyes adjusted. 9. The oldest, maybe 15. The youngest, no older than my granddaughter. They had on-canvas coveralls, too big for them, and work gloves and toques pulled down, and they moved the way people move when they've been up too long, and there's no reason to hurry because the work just refills itself. 2 were dragging brush. A couple were stacking. One small one was hauling rounds in a wheelbarrow with a flat tire, and one was up on the splitting block with a maul. And even from 60 feet away, even in that gray nothing light, I knew her. I knew her by the way she set her feet. Hannah always squared up before she did anything hard, a little planting motion she'd had since she was small. And there she was doing it before each swing, settling her boots and then bringing them all down like it weighed more than she did. She'd gotten thin. Her face had gone sharp in a way that stopped my heart, because 7 weeks ago it had still had some of the roundness of a kid in it, and now it didn't. My granddaughter was 12 years old, and she was splitting firewood in the dark, and she had the face of somebody who'd stopped expecting things. Everything in me went very still and very clear. I don't get angry fast. The water teaches you that, or it teaches you to keep it where it can't get at the wheel. But I felt something settle into place behind my ribs, cold and certain, and I started down the slope. I was halfway down before a young guy by the tree line saw me. 25, maybe. Fleece vest, a clipboard, the soft hands of somebody who'd never done a day of the work he was supervising. He came toward me with his palm out. Sir, you can't be down here. This is a private facility. That's my granddaughter. Hannah's head came up. The maul didn't swing. It just fell out of her hands, dropped straight down like her fingers had quit, and for 1 second she didn't move at all, like she didn't trust it. Then her whole face came apart and she was running, stumbling over the broken ground in those big boots, and she hit me so hard I had to step back and brace, and she was shaking. Not crying yet, just shaking, the whole of her, the way a kid shakes when they've been holding something clenched for so long that letting go feels like falling. Grandpa, muffled into my coat. Grandpa, you came. I thought you weren't coming. I've got you. I'm right here. I wrote you letters. She pulled back and looked at me, and her eyes were doing something terrible, searching my face. I wrote you 4 times. You never wrote back. They said you got them, and you said you needed a break from me. They said that's why you didn't come. I had not gotten any letters. I hadn't known she was writing. 9 weeks on the water and not one piece of mail had reached me, and someone had told this child that my silence was an answer, that her grandfather had read her words and decided she was too much. I held onto her and I looked over the top of her head at the other kids who had all stopped working. Every single one of them was watching us, and not one of them looked hopeful exactly. They looked like kids watching something they'd given up believing in happen to somebody else. A girl about Hannah's age took a step toward me and stopped. She had a cold sore cracked at the corner of her mouth and chilblains on her knuckles, the raw red kind you get from working barehanded in the cold for weeks. She said very quietly, "Are you taking her home?" It didn't go up at the end. It wasn't really a question. She was just leaving room for me to say yes. "I'm going to get help," I said. "I promise you. All of you." The girl nodded like she'd known I'd say that, like she'd heard that exact sentence before from somebody who drove away and never came back. She turned around and went back to the woodpile, and something tore loose in my chest that I still don't have the words for. I've spent my whole life around hard men and hard weather, and I had never wanted to burn a place to the ground the way I wanted to right then. A man came around the corner of the lodge while I was still standing there with Hannah's hand locked onto my forearm. Late 50s. Fit in the careful way of a man who works at it, so you'll notice. A good wool jacket, boots that had never broken trail in their life. He walked like he expected the ground to arrange itself for him. Mr. Vesterhaug. He knew my name. He had the warmth of a man who'd practiced warmth in a mirror. I can see you're upset, and I understand. We weren't expecting you. This is a delicate moment in Hannah's progress. She's swinging a maul in the dark at 5:30 in the morning. The early hours are when young people meet themselves. He smiled, and I'll give him this. It was a good smile, the kind that had probably opened a lot of checkbooks. Cold mornings, honest work. It's the heart of what we do. I'm Roland Tessier, director. We spoke in the summer. We didn't speak. I signed a form my sister put in front of me. His expression shifted a half degree. The recalibration of a man realizing the script he'd planned wasn't going to run. Your sister enrolled Hannah because she was concerned. The withdrawal, the grades, the grief she wasn't processing. We have remarkable outcomes with girls in exactly her situation. The wilderness method. What's the work for? What happens to all this wood? He didn't miss a beat. We supply cordwood to camps and lodges across the district. It teaches the children the full arc of labor. Cutting, splitting, stacking, delivery. There's dignity in it. It's therapy through productivity. The value isn't financial, Mr. Vesterhaug. It's the character it builds. You don't pay them. The work is the treatment. You can't put a price on what these young people are becoming. Hannah's grip tightened on my arm, and she said it low and fast, like she had to get it out before he could stop her. Grandpa, they lock the bunkhouse at night. There's a chain on the door. And there's a girl, Maddie. She cut her leg on the saw last week, and it's not getting better. And Mr. Curl. Tessier put her in the quiet cabin, and she's still there. She's been there 4 days. Tessier's warmth went off like somebody flipping a breaker. I'm afraid you can't go any further without proper authorization. Your sister signed a comprehensive agreement. Hannah is enrolled through the end of November, and your presence here is interfering with a clinical process that depends on. I started walking toward the lodge. Mr. Vesterhaug. His voice came after me hard. Your granddaughter is in our legal care. If you remove her, you're in breach of a binding contract, and I will have no choice but to call the authorities. Good, I said without turning around. Call them, please, right now. And he did. I heard him on the phone behind me, calm, reasonable, reporting a disturbance, an unstable family member, the careful vocabulary of a man who'd made this call before. 2 of his staff moved to put themselves between me and the door, big quiet guys who'd been trained to handle things with their bodies in the way of a doorway rather than their fists. I put Hannah behind me, and I kept going. I spent 30 years loading and lashing on the deck of a freighter in November gales. I have walked across catwalks in conditions that would put most men on their knees. I wasn't going to be turned around by 2 camp counselors in fleece vests, and I think they read that off me because they didn't grab me. They just followed, talking the whole time about how I needed to calm down, and I let it wash off me and went through the door. The OPP detachment was the better part of an hour out. In that hour, I saw the inside of Northwind Character Camp, and it was nothing like the folder with the lake on it. The brochure, which I read later, had photographs of clean, bright rooms and kids laughing around a campfire. And it talked about individual cabins and licensed counselors and 3 nourishing meals a day prepared with food grown on site. What was actually there was a long bunk room with steel frame beds bolted to the floor, 14 of them, and a chain and padlock looped through the door handles from the outside. 2 of the windows had been pulled out and boarded over with plywood, no glass. Just a draft coming through the seams and a propane heater in the corner that wasn't keeping up. The quiet cabin Hannah had mentioned was a converted tool shed with no insulation, a camp cot, and a pail. Maddie was in it. 13 years old, her leg was wrapped in a tea towel gone stiff and brown, and she looked up at me from that cot with the flat, used-up expression of a kid who had run completely out of ways to be surprised by anything an adult did. I have not been able to forget her face. I expect I'll have it until I die. The constable who came up that road first was a woman about my age, OPP, 20-some years in by the look of her. She stood in the door of the bunkhouse and didn't say anything for a good 5 seconds. I watched her take it in. The chain, the boarded windows, the kids who'd stopped working and drifted up toward the buildings to stand in a silent clump. Then she keyed her shoulder radio and started talking, low and steady, and I knew from the number of times she repeated the location that a lot of vehicles were about to come up that logging road. What followed took most of the day. 2 more cruisers, an OPP investigator out of North Bay, a worker from the Children's Aid Society who arrived looking braced and got more grim by the hour, a Crown attorney who drove up from somewhere with a warrant application already half-written on a laptop balanced on the hood of her car. Tessier held it together for the first few hours. He had binders. He had signed agreements from every parent. He had a registration as a nonprofit and a business number and a letter from a counselor in Sudbury who'd lend her credentials to the program's so-called clinical framework. He was a man who'd thought hard about paperwork. What he did not have was any way to explain the chain on the bunkhouse door, or the boarded windows, or the child with the infected leg in an unheated shed, or the spreadsheet the investigator found on a laptop in his office showing that Northwind had cleared better than $310,000 the previous year, selling firewood to lodges and outfitters who had no idea who was cutting it. They took Maddie to the hospital in an ambulance. 2 other kids had injuries nobody had treated. All of them were underfed and dehydrated and cold. I sat in my truck with Hannah while the day came apart around us, the yard filling with vehicles and people in different uniforms, and she ate the granola bars I had in the door pocket and drank a whole bottle of water without stopping for breath. And for a long time, she didn't say anything. Then she said, looking out the windshield instead of at me, "I thought you sent me here because you didn't want me. I thought you got tired of having to take care of me, and this was how you got rid of me without saying it." I had to sit with that one before I could answer it. "Hannah, look at me." She did. I was 9 weeks on a boat in the middle of a lake, bigger than some countries, and every single day of it the only thing I wanted was to come home to you. Not to anything else in this world. You. That's the truth, and I need you to put it somewhere you can't lose it. She looked at me for a long moment, the way she does when she's testing whether something will hold her weight. Then she said, I believed him because he talked like he knew how everything worked, like he had it all figured out. "I know," I said. "That's the whole trick. That's exactly what he wanted you to think." My sister got to the camp around 7 that night. She'd driven up when I stopped answering, and she got out of her car and saw the cruisers and the cast van and the kids wrapped in those orange emergency blankets on the lodge steps, and she stood there with her hand over her mouth and didn't say anything for a long time. She hadn't known. Not the real of it. She'd known Northwind as a program for struggling kids, which is how Tessier sold it to people who were drowning and looking for a hand. She'd paid the fee and signed the agreement and believed what she'd been told, because she'd been doing her best with a grieving girl who wasn't hers in a house that wasn't hers, while her brother was 1,000 kilometers away on the water, and she hadn't known what else to do. That didn't make it all right, but it made it what it was, and it wasn't the same thing Tessier had done, and I made myself remember that even on the nights I didn't want to. Hannah wouldn't look at her that night. She slept in the truck on the drive home, curled against the door with my coat over her, and I drove south through the dark thinking about every paper I'd ever signed without reading, and every time I'd let somebody else's summary of how things were going stand in for me, asking myself. I'd wanted so badly to believe there was a competent adult holding the rope while I was gone that I'd made it easy for the wrong one to take hold of it. The investigation ran most of a year. Tessier had been operating Northwind for 5 years across 2 locations, this one and another up near Hearst, 30-some kids in total, moving through a network held together by a numbered company and a quiet referral system that fed on exactly the kind of family we were. Single parents, grandparents raising grandkids, people undone by a death or an illness or a job that took them away, desperate enough to believe a folder with a lake on it. He was convicted on 9 counts. Forced labor, fraud, criminal negligence causing bodily harm, unlawful confinement. He got 18 years. 3 of his staff went down with him for terms between 4 and 10. The counselor in Sudbury who'd rented out her name lost her license and got 2 years for fraud. My sister was never charged. She'd been deceived the way the whole thing was built to deceive people. She and I are still family. We had to find our way to a different kind of family than before. Quieter, more careful with each other, but we got there mostly. The first month home, Hannah barely spoke. She ate well, which her doctor said mattered, and she slept a great deal, which the doctor also said was good. But she'd get up in the night, and I'd find her standing in the kitchen, in the dark, like she wasn't sure the house was real. And I started leaving the hall light on, and then the kitchen light. And after a while, most of the lights in the house burned all night, and I decided I didn't care what it did to the hydro bill. Before all of it, before the camp and before her parents died, Hannah used to paint. Little watercolors, mostly birds. She'd sit at the kitchen table with a field guide open and a coffee mug full of brushy water and work on a chickadee for an hour. After the funeral, she'd stopped. After Northwind, she. I've turned it over more nights than I can count, and it always lands in the same place. Tessier didn't break into my life and take Hannah. I left the door open, and he walked through it. That's the hard arithmetic of it. A man stretched thin, 9 weeks on the water, signing his name on a line he never read because asking the real questions would have made a tired evening longer. Every consequence that followed, the chain on the bunkhouse door, the mall coming down in the dark, a 13-year-old named Maddie in a shed with an infected leg, ran straight back to choices that felt small when I made them. Nothing about that camp was an accident. It was built piece by piece to find men like me at the end of our rope and to count on us not looking too closely. The lesson I can't put down is that the gap between loving someone and protecting them gets filled by whoever's standing closest, and you'd better make sure it's you. What I'd say to anybody raising a kid, especially the ones doing it alone or from a distance, is that 3 things kept Hannah and kept me, and not one of them is luck. The first is the plain decency to do right, even when it costs you to come up the road instead of waiting out the contract, to tell a frightened girl the truth about why you were gone instead of the easy version. The second is the habit of asking hard questions and actually listening to the answers, of reading the paper before you sign it, of noticing when a story doesn't hold together the way Tessier's never did. A folder with a lake on it is not an answer. Friction when you ask to visit is the answer. And the third is the kind of steadiness that gets you through the long fog after, the months Hannah wouldn't touch her paints, the nights I left every light in the house burning, the slow work of earning back a trust that should never have been spent. None of that came in a flash. It came the way she finished that owl. 3 weeks of small, steady passes, because the things that take a long time are mostly the ones worth doing. I think about the girl who asked me, flat and unsurprised, "Are you taking her home?" and how she'd clearly heard that promise broken before. I keep her in mind, not to punish myself, but because she's the reason I tell this at all. Somewhere right now there's a parent or a grandparent holding a glossy brochure, exhausted, wanting so badly to believe help exists that they're about to stop asking. If you're that person, ask anyway. Drive up the road. Stay when you get there. Be the one standing in the gap, because a child shouldn't have to find their own way back from the dark while the people who love them tell themselves somebody else is holding the rope. I told myself that once. I won't again, and Hannah's never had to wonder since where I am.